10 Harsh Realities of Traveling the Old West in a Covered Wagon. Have you ever played the Oregon Trail game or watched classic Western films featuring those iconic covered wagons traversing the plains? However, how well do you truly understand the experience of traveling in a covered wagon? Before the advent of automobiles, trains, or airplanes, these wagons were the sole means of reaching the Western territories, and the journey was anything but easy. It involved months filled with hardship, peril, and discomfort. The romanticized image of pioneers galloping across the vast plains is far removed from the harsh truth. Prepare to uncover 10 astonishing facts about the actual conditions faced by those traveling in covered wagons. Extended periods of hardship. Traveling by covered wagon was not known for its speed. On an ideal day with favorable terrain and weather, a wagon might manage to cover 20 miles. However, this was the best-case scenario. Typically, the daily distance ranged from 8 to 20 miles. Challenging landscapes, mountain passes, and inclement weather could significantly hinder progress. For instance, if you were to embark on your journey from St. Louis, a common departure point for westward migration, the direct distance to San Francisco is approximately 1,750 miles. Even at a pace of 20 miles per day, this would equate to nearly 90 days of travel. However, this is merely a theoretical estimate. In practice, wagons seldom maintained such a speed due to frequent delays, broken wheels, ill animals, adverse weather, and difficult terrain. Moreover, the actual trails were considerably longer than the straight-line distance, winding around various obstacles and adding many extra miles to the journey. Consequently, a trip from St. Louis to the West Coast typically spanned around 6 months. This half-year of arduous travel exposed pioneers to the elements with limited provisions and comfort. The journey was fraught with danger. Travelers faced illness, injuries, and in some cases, fatalities along the way. Reaching the West Coast was a remarkable accomplishment, showcasing the resilience and determination of the pioneers. They endured significant sacrifices in both time and difficulty for the opportunity to start anew. Can you envision spending 6 months traveling in a covered wagon? What do you believe would be the most challenging aspect? The selection and constraints of wagons. As pioneers readied themselves for their westward expedition, they had a few primary wagon choices. The most recognizable was the prairie schooner, the classic covered wagon that is widely known. Large wooden arches extended along the wagon's length, draped with canvas to form a protective canopy. This canvas offered shade from the sun and a relatively secure area for storing belongings. It served as the 19th century equivalent of a minivan, transporting families and their possessions across extensive distances. The name derives from the fact that, from afar, the curved canvas tops resembled the sails of a schooner ship, leading to the moniker prairie schooner. These wagons were crafted for the long journeys to the West Coast, yet the experience was far from comfortable. The alternative was the Conestoga wagon. Larger and heavier than the prairie schooner, it was drawn by teams of up to 6 horses. However, its bulk made it ill-suited for lengthy cross-country travels. The Conestoga was more appropriate for shorter trips, such as transporting goods from a city like St. Louis to the Kansas or Oklahoma territories. It was primarily utilized for freight rather than for families undertaking the grueling westward journey. Regardless of the type of wagon, travel was exceedingly difficult. Paved roads were non-existent. Pioneers navigated rough dirt trails, often little more than rutted pathways. Severe weather could transform these trails into muddy bogs. Wheel breakages were frequent, animals often became fatigued or injured, and wagons could become stuck, malfunction, or even disintegrate entirely. These wagons, while indispensable, served as a constant reminder of the challenges faced on the trail. Sleeping under the stars, one can easily picture pioneer families huddled inside their covered wagons at night. After all, with a canvas roof overhead, It seems like a natural form of shelter. However, the actual situation was quite different. Those prairie schooners were filled to capacity with all of a family's belongings, and the interior space was limited, measuring only about 4 feet in width and 10 feet in length, similar to a slightly oversized queen bed. Now, envision cramming all your possessions into that confined area. There was simply no space for family members to sleep inside, which meant that most nights they had to sleep outdoors. They would either lay blankets on the ground or construct a makeshift tent using canvas and poles. This arrangement provided minimal protection from the elements. Families faced exposure to intense sunlight, frigid temperatures, rain, and wind. When the weather turned severe, they would huddle beneath their wagons or even rest on the hard ground below, seeking any available shelter. This led to uncomfortable and often restless nights, certainly not conducive to a good night's sleep. It likely took a toll on their backs as well. Wild West slow fast food. As you journey westward in your covered wagon, you have packed your belongings, tools, and everything necessary for a new beginning. But what about your meals? Stopping by a grocery store on the Oregon Trail was not an option. Those prairie schooners and Conestoga wagons were tightly packed with household items, leaving no room for ready-to-eat food. This is where the chuck wagon became essential. The chuck wagon served as the mobile kitchen for the wagon train. Comparable in size to a prairie schooner, it was specifically designed for food preparation and storage, playing a crucial role in keeping families nourished during their lengthy travels. Equipped with a water barrel mounted on the side, the chuck wagon provided easy access to fresh water throughout the day. Many also included a coffee grinder, which offered a much-needed caffeine boost after a long day of travel. Beneath the chuck wagon was the possum belly, a storage area for firewood and, interestingly, dried cow dung, commonly referred to as cow chips. In the vast, treeless plains, cow chips served as a crucial fuel source for cooking fires. Each evening, the chuck wagon emerged as the focal point of the camp, where families congregated while cooks prepared basic meals such as beans, bacon, and biscuits. This gathering time fostered storytelling and community bonding, providing a much-needed break after a long day on the trail. The chuck wagon represented more than just sustenance. It embodied resourcefulness and camaraderie, vital for both survival and morale during the westward migration. While the Great Plains are often associated with horses and horseback riding, it is important to note that not all groups participated in this equestrian culture. Many Native American tribes became skilled horsemen, utilizing horses for hunting, warfare, and transportation. American soldiers and explorers also depended heavily on horses. However, settlers were largely excluded from this horse-centric lifestyle. For most pioneer families, the expense of owning a horse was prohibitive. Horses were not only costly to purchase, but also required considerable maintenance. Settlers were already stretching their finances to acquire wagons, supplies, and provisions for their journey, making horses a luxury they could not afford. Instead, they turned to mules and oxen, which proved to be more practical for their westward trek. Unlike horses, mules and oxen could thrive on the coarse forage available along the trail, making them easier and less expensive to feed. These animals were also stronger and more resilient, capable of pulling heavily laden wagons across extensive distances and through difficult terrain. Mules, recognized for their sure-footedness, were especially valuable in mountainous regions, while oxen, though slower, were incredibly strong and dependable, making them ideal for transporting heavy loads over long distances. They became the backbone of the westward trails. Upon reaching their new homes, settlers continued to depend on their mules and oxen for agricultural work and other tasks, solidifying these animals' roles as essential contributors to their new lives. Horses, despite their allure, were not a practical choice for the typical pioneer family. Their preference for mules and oxen illustrates the ingenuity and practicality that defined the westward expansion. What aspect of the risks faced by pioneers surprised you the most? Pack wisely. Consider the experience of traveling for months in a wagon devoid of shock absorbers, navigating roads that were little more than dirt paths. This was the harsh reality for pioneers journeying westward. The ride was undeniably arduous. Prairie schooners, the most prevalent type of wagon, were infamous for their bumpy rides. Their tall and narrow structure contributed to their instability, while the wooden wheels and axles provided no form of cushioning. Every bump and dip in the road transmitted jarring shocks throughout the wagon. Passengers endured relentless bouncing for hours, days, and even weeks. Settlers attempted to alleviate the discomfort by packing their belongings strategically, placing heavier items at the bottom. However, even with meticulous packing, the journey remained exceedingly rough. Interestingly, the prairie schooner was viewed as an improvement over the Conestoga wagon. Although larger and capable of carrying more cargo, the Conestoga's size increased the likelihood of it tipping over. Many trails were too narrow for the Conestoga, causing its wheels to frequently slip off the path, resulting in a truly jarring experience. To escape the relentless jolting, many pioneers chose to walk alongside their wagons. However, envision walking for hundreds or even thousands of miles across such rugged terrain. It was a draining endeavor that left them vulnerable to the elements. Thus, pioneers faced a difficult decision: endure the punishing ride or undertake the exhausting walk. Neither option was easy, underscoring the significant challenges they encountered on their westward journey. Prepare for potential breakdowns. Picture this: you are traversing the country in a covered wagon, far from civilization. Suddenly, a mechanical failure occurs. There are no paved roads, garages, or tow trucks available, just you, your malfunctioning wagon, and the wilderness surrounding you. This was the reality for pioneers, as wagon breakdowns posed a constant risk. The rugged trails were unforgiving, wooden wheels fractured and splintered when traversing rocky and uneven surfaces. Axles broke under the pressure, while metal components deteriorated and detached. In the event of a breakdown, assistance was not readily available. Consequently, pioneers equipped their wagons with vital tools such as hammers, saws, axes, and nails, anticipating the need for repairs. They also brought along spare parts, fully aware that mechanical failures were unavoidable. However, even the most thorough preparations could fall short. They often had to improvise, utilizing available materials to effect repairs. A malfunctioning wagon brought the journey to a standstill. Families faced the arduous task of unloading all their belongings, which was labor-intensive. Frequently, they had to turn the wagon on its side to reach the undercarriage for necessary repairs. All of this occurred while they were vulnerable to the elements, wild animals, and various other threats. Each successful repair represented a hard-earned triumph, showcasing their resilience and creativity. They became their own mechanics, depending on their skills and ingenuity to navigate these ongoing obstacles. If you were preparing for a covered wagon expedition, which 3 modern items would you choose to bring? Weather posed a continual challenge for pioneers journeying along the western trails. Although the prairie schooners with their canvas tops provided some degree of shelter, it was limited. The canvas itself was not inherently waterproof. Settlers had to treat it to enhance its resistance to the elements. They typically began with heavy cotton duck canvas, weighing around 10 ounces. Subsequently, they applied a coating of linseed oil, which formed a water-resistant barrier to safeguard the family's possessions from rain and light snow. Once treated, the canvas was meticulously draped over the wagon's frame and secured tightly. However, even treated canvas was not entirely reliable. In the open prairie, wind was an ever-present element, and rain seldom fell vertically. Strong gusts could drive rain sideways, allowing it to seep beneath the canvas cover. When it wasn't raining, the wind often stirred up clouds of dust and sand, bombarding the wagons and infiltrating every nook and cranny. To address this issue, settlers incorporated a drawstring along the edges of the canvas. This feature enabled them to tighten the canvas, creating a more enclosed environment, akin to a large hoodie for their wagon. It provided additional protection against wind, rain, and dust, offering some respite from the harsh conditions. Nevertheless, despite these measures, severe weather continued to pose a significant risk. Challenging river crossings. Eventually, every pioneer family heading west encountered the necessity of crossing a river. Although much of the western terrain is arid, rivers and streams meandered through the landscape, presenting a formidable challenge. These crossings were arduous for everyone involved: families, their animals, and their wagons. Occasionally, larger rivers had ferries available, but these services were often too expensive for most settlers. As a result, they had to ford the river, driving their wagons directly through the water, which was a perilous endeavor. For smaller rivers, pioneers frequently had to be resourceful, constructing their own rafts from available materials. If fortune smiled upon them, they might find nearby trees to lash together logs and create a makeshift ferry. The critical task was identifying the optimal crossing point, ideally a narrow section with a gentle current. Once they located a suitable spot, they would attempt to waterproof the wagon bed by applying wax and sealing any gaps. The wagon transformed into a fragile vessel. Then, with their oxen straining against the load, they would cautiously enter the current. Successfully crossing the river brought immense relief, but it was always a gamble. If the current proved too strong or the wagon too heavy, it could easily capsize, dumping its contents into the water, and animals could be swept away. Individuals faced the risk of injury or even drowning during river crossings, which were fraught with tension and danger, serving as a stark reminder of the challenges encountered on the westward journey. Nevertheless, they persevered. It is truly astonishing that these pioneers continued their westward trek in the face of immense difficulties. The aspiration for a better life and the opportunity to possess their own land fueled their resolve. Entire families, spanning from grandparents to young children, undertook these grueling journeys in search of a new beginning. They were instrumental in driving westward expansion, marking the onset of a new chapter for the United States. However, this movement had catastrophic effects on Native American communities. As settlers appropriated land, Native American tribes were uprooted and relegated to reservations. Their traditional way of life was irrevocably transformed, often in tragic ways. This period was influenced by the notion of manifest destiny, the belief that America was fated to expand across the continent, and indeed it did, reaching the Pacific coast. The opening of the frontier spurred industrial growth and technological innovations, such as the transcontinental railroad. By the late 1800s, traveling across the country became considerably easier, yet it was the early pioneers in their covered wagons who forged the path. Their journeys were extraordinarily challenging, characterized by arduous labor and persistent peril. Many did not survive the journey. Their narrative is one of remarkable resilience and determination, but it is also a tale of loss and displacement. This complex and significant chapter is an essential part of American history. Please comment 1 to indicate that you will be watching this video until the end. Hazards of the journey. Just how perilous was the Oregon Trail? It is difficult to determine with certainty. Determining the exact death toll among emigrants is as challenging as estimating their total numbers, with figures varying significantly. Some historians suggest that the mortality rate among travelers ranged from 4 to 6%. This estimation equates to approximately 12,000 to 24,000 fatalities, while other assessments suggest rates could reach as high as 10%. The primary dangers faced by these pioneers included accidents and diseases. Diaries from the era frequently recount incidents of accidental shootings, injuries from wildlife encounters, drownings, and fatalities due to exposure to harsh weather conditions. Wagon accidents were prevalent, and tragically children sometimes suffered severe injuries after being run over by moving wagons. Life along the trail was fraught with peril, with death ever present, serving as a grim reminder of the hazards encountered on the westward journey. Disease posed a significant threat on the Oregon Trail, exacerbated by poor sanitation. Opportunities for bathing or washing clothes were infrequent, and access to clean drinking water was often limited. Water sources were frequently contaminated by human and animal waste, as well as garbage and carcasses. Cholera, a disease transmitted through contaminated water, emerged as the leading cause of death. Diphtheria, a highly contagious illness, was particularly deadly among children. Exhausted and poorly nourished, pioneers were also susceptible to typhoid fever, mountain fever, likely transmitted by ticks, dysentery, mosquito-borne illnesses such as malaria, food poisoning, scurvy due to vitamin C deficiency, and alkali poisoning from tainted water. Additionally, diseases like measles, mumps, and smallpox significantly impacted the population, especially among the young. Childbirth presented significant dangers for women traveling the trail. The absence of adequate medical care meant that even minor health issues could escalate into life-threatening conditions. The threat of disease loomed large, casting a pervasive shadow over the journey westward. The report also announced that 55,000 enlisted men from the Air Forces and 25,000 from service forces would be transferred to ground forces by the end of January. However, when Yank published updated figures on February 2, 1945, it became evident that total losses listings had been abandoned entirely. Instead, a narrowly constructed Army battle casualty figure of 556,352 through December 21, 1944, was presented. The presentation of these figures had also changed significantly. Rather than being listed in clear columns, they were buried within lengthy paragraphs alongside Navy casualties and comparative analyses of British and German losses. These reports included reminders that Britain had suffered far more heavily. 635,107 military casualties out of a total of 1,043,554 for the British Empire, reinforcing a narrative of shared sacrifice while masking the psychological impact of American losses. Despite these efforts to manage perceptions, Americans increasingly sensed the toll of war. By late 1944, roughly 65,000 U.S. soldiers were being killed, wounded, injured, or declared missing each month during the casualty surge, a figure that did not include psychological casualties or sickness. The Roosevelt administration and military leadership sought to mitigate this impact through various strategies. General Dwight D. Eisenhower issued a directive to replace the term replacement with reinforcement for soldiers sent to frontline units in an attempt to avoid connotations of expendability. However, this change was largely ignored at lower command levels. Dr. Arthur G. Voles later recalled that soldiers understood their grim reality regardless of terminology. Reinforcements were simply filling spots left by those killed or incapacitated. General George C. Marshall took a more direct approach in addressing public concerns over casualties. In a speech at New York's Waldorf Astoria Hotel shortly before Germany's Ardennes counteroffensive, he acknowledged rising casualties but emphasized their necessity. It is far better to accept heavy casualties for a brief period than the much greater total which inevitably accumulates from prolonged inactivity on the battlefield. This sentiment reflected a broader effort to prepare Americans for continued sacrifices as battles intensified. By early 1945, passions ran high as Allied forces faced bloody fighting in Iwo Jima, and stalled progress in Germany. Marshall assured Congressman William E. Hess in March that he and others in the War Department were acutely aware of daily casualties. He also informed General Eisenhower about growing opposition to deploying 18-year-olds in combat following Senator Robert A. Taft's critical speech in Congress. The final U.S. casualty figures published in Yank on March 9, 1945, totaled 782,180, 693,342 for the Army alone. These figures were accompanied by a cartoon depicting a lone pup tent with a tongue-in-cheek caption questioning where reinforcements were coming from, a reflection of growing unease among soldiers and civilians alike. Although casualty information was shared with Congress in closed sessions at both the Pentagon and Capitol Hill by Marshall and Secretary of War Henry Stimson, public reporting became increasingly selective during negotiations over manpower needs. The War Department stopped publishing monthly listings altogether after March 9th, a decision reflecting concerns about morale and political fallout as draft quotas increased dramatically for planned invasions of Japan's home islands in 1945 to 46. Ultimately, these shifts in casualty reporting reflected broader challenges faced by military leaders as they balanced transparency with maintaining morale on both the home front and battlefields abroad. During the winter and spring of 1945, the United States government took decisive steps to address critical manpower needs in preparation for the anticipated invasion of Japan. On January 11th, Secretary of War Henry Stimson held a press conference announcing that the Army's monthly Selective Service call-up would increase from 60,000 to 80,000 in January and rise again to 100,000 per month by March. When combined with Navy and Marine Corps draft calls, total inductions climbed to over 140,000 per month. The era of the great overland trails was nearing its end, yet the Oregon Trail had been evolving for many years. The California Gold Rush of 1849 led to an influx of 49ers, altering the trail and its neighboring communities. The 1850s witnessed a heightened military presence along the route, accompanied by physical enhancements such as ferries and bridges. Steamboats began navigating the Columbia River, providing an alternative to wagon travel for portions of the journey. The 1860s introduced even more transformations, with settlements expanding in size and number. Communication improved with the establishment of the Pony Express and later the transcontinental telegraph. Stagecoach lines proliferated, offering quicker travel options. However, following the Civil War, tensions with Native Americans escalated in various regions. The Oregon Trail, once a remote and arduous route, was becoming increasingly integrated into a rapidly evolving nation. While the railroad signified the conclusion of an era, the Oregon Trail had already experienced a profound transformation. New advancements in communication and transportation often followed the established paths of the Oregon Trail. Telegraph lines were installed alongside the trail, and in some instances, railroad tracks were laid directly over it. Although the advent of the railroad did not completely eliminate wagon travel, it significantly diminished its necessity. Among all the westward trails, the Oregon Trail remained in operation the longest, primarily because the railroad did not extend to Oregon until the early 1880s. Even after railroads took over most of the wagon train traffic, the Oregon Trail continued to fulfill an important role. It transformed into a key route for transporting cattle and sheep eastward to markets. Once a pathway for westward expansion, the trail now enabled a different type of movement, linking the developing western regions with the established markets in the east. Although the Oregon Trail is no longer a primary route for westward migration, it still contributed to the changing American economy. The trail, as a continuous and navigable route, has effectively ceased to exist, yet its legacy endures. Today, remnants of the trail can still be seen, providing insights into this significant chapter of American history. In various locations, the ruts left by thousands of wagons are still visible. Near Guernsey, Wyoming, these ruts are particularly pronounced, having been worn as deep as 5 feet into the sandstone. One can envision the multitude of wagons that traversed this very area, carrying hopeful pioneers toward the west. Names and dates etched into the soft sandstone formations, such as Independence Rock, continue to testify to the journeys of these travelers. These inscriptions, made over a century ago, create a personal connection to the pioneers who undertook this challenging expedition. Many landmarks along the trail are now designated as protected areas. Scotts Bluff National Monument and Chimney Rock National Historic Site safeguard iconic formations that guided and inspired generations of pioneers. Historic forts, including Forts Bridger, Kearney, Laramie, and Vancouver, along with sites like the Whitman Mission, provide further insights into the experiences of those who traveled the trail. These preserved locations enable us to engage with history, providing a direct connection to the pioneers who ventured westward and contributed to the formation of the nation we recognize today. Acknowledging the significance of the Oregon Trail, the U.S. Congress designated the Oregon National Historic Trail in 1978 with the aim of safeguarding and maintaining the remnants of the trail while ensuring public access wherever feasible. The National Park Service manages the trail in collaboration with the Bureau of Land Management and various other agencies. Numerous interpretive centers along the route enhance visitors' understanding of the trail's historical context and importance. The Oregon Trail is also linked to additional National Park Service sites such as the Homestead National Monument of America in Nebraska, Fossil Butte National Monument in Wyoming, and Craters of the Moon National Monument and Preserve, along with Hagerman Fossil Beds National Monument in Idaho. The trail traverses parts of several national forests, providing a wider perspective on westward expansion by examining themes of settlement, natural history, and the obstacles encountered by pioneers. By preserving and interpreting these locations, we cultivate a greater appreciation for the sacrifices and achievements of those who journeyed along the Oregon Trail, which played a crucial role in shaping the American West and the nation as a whole. The Oregon Trail has not only influenced the physical landscape, but has also permeated popular culture. Numerous films have illustrated the trail and the trials faced by pioneers. In 1977, a brief television series titled The Oregon Trail was aired. However, the most renowned representation of the Oregon Trail is the educational computer game that gained immense popularity in the 1980s and 90s, introducing countless students to the challenges and adventures of westward migration. This game remains a significant part of our cultural heritage. The Oregon Trail game has been reintroduced in multiple digital formats, allowing new generations to engage with this interactive historical experience. From films to television shows and video games, the Oregon Trail continues to inspire us, serving as a reminder of the pioneers who ventured into the unknown to establish new lives in the West. Traveling by covered wagon was far from a luxurious getaway. It was a demanding test of resilience, characterized by a relentless battle against nature and uncertainty with each passing mile. These pioneers endured significant challenges, yet their unwavering resolve paved the way westward, ultimately shaping the American West as we recognize it today. Please share your thoughts in the comments if I overlooked anything. If you found this video enjoyable, kindly like, share, and subscribe to our channel.